Every diplomatic negotiation is just a long, boring prelude to a moment someone points a weapon that doesn't work as well as they think it does. Sergeant Greg Stone, a man whose patience had been surgically removed by years of corporate warfare, much preferred to get straight to the melting. He propped his bulk against the polished opalescent wall of the private negotiation suite. The composite plates of his armor a scarred matte black hole in the room's soft ambient glow. His universe had shrunk to the collection of blue-steeled components resting on a grease-stained cloth across his thigh. He worked with a deliberate, almost devotional slowness. The resonant thwack of him wiping down the slide of his magnum sidearm, the abrasive scrape of the recoil being tested for wear. These sounds filled the chamber, each one a small metallic punctuation mark in the heavy quiet of the human delegation's collective anxiety. The delegates themselves sat rigid at a table carved from a single colossal slab of polished synthetic osmium, each trying with every fiber of their being to project an aura of casual belonging that absolutely they did not possess. Stone, was the full siege loadout entirely essential for a diplomatic meet and greet? The inquiry came from Leland Shaw, the lead diplomat. His suit, woven from what looked like solidified light, probably cost more than Greg's entire life insurance payout. Shaw's gaze kept twitching toward the heavy Gauss rifle magnetically locked to Greg's back. Greg slid the magazine home into the Magnum's grip. It seated with a solid, authoritative kerchunk. He kept his eyes on his work. "I don't pay you for the jobs that go right," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration like rocks grinding in a quarry. "I pay you for the jobs that go sideways, upside down, and inside out. You always plan for inside out." Across the table, emissary Theon of the Celestine Ascendancy radiated a placid, infuriating superiority. He was a tall, willowy humanoid, his skin the color of cool alabaster, and his large, dark eyes seemed to drink the light from the room in, leaving nothing behind. 2 guards flanked him, their armor looking less like protection and more like a fluid kinetic sculpture, all flowing curves of a gleaming pearlescent alloy. A faint, cloying scent of sterilized vanilla and hot copper emanated from them, the olfactory signature of their advanced power systems. Theon offered a smile that failed to reach his unsettlingly still eyes. It was a slow, condescending curve of his thin lips. With a gesture that was both languid and needlessly dramatic, he activated a small device on the table. A rifle bloomed into existence above the polished osmium, hovering in a soft, ethereal luminescence. It was a thing of offensive beauty, sculpted from a single piece of what looked like solid light that throbbed with a slow internal pulse. It possessed no discernible trigger, no magazine, no ejection port. It was an art installation that happened to vaporize things. "We extend an offering," Theon began, his voice a smooth melodic sequence of tones that scraped along Greg's spine like a rusty file. "A gift to elevate your people, to protect your species from its rather messy industrial phase." He waved a slender, 4-jointed finger vaguely in Greg's direction. "You still cling to contained chemical detonations and crude kinetic projectiles. It is the methodology of a juvenile species, one that has just discovered how to bang sharp rocks together. We offer you the path to transcendence, to clean, efficient, perfect energy." A phantom sensation ambushed Greg, a ghost of a memory so potent it was almost a taste. The smell of rain hitting hot pavement on a failed colony world. The acrid tang of ozone from short-circuiting power conduits. The raw, terrified screams of his first squad as their corporate-issued, state-of-the-art energy rifles sputtered and died in a sudden downpour on Triton's third moon. He remembered the overwhelming muzzle flash from the enemy's simple, ancient slug throwers. The brutal, deafening roar was the last sound his friends ever heard. That memory coiled in his gut, a cold, dense lump of lead. All we ask in exchange for this generosity, Theon continued, his voice now positively dripping with sanctimonious magnanimity, is that you grant the Celestine Ascendancy exclusive resource tributary rights to the unclaimed world in your frontier territories. A minor consideration for such a monumental advancement. We will guide you, protect you from your own, disorderly impulses. He paused, allowing the insult to steep in the quiet room. We have studied your historical archives. You have perfected the art of conflict, but your instruments for it remain laughably unrefined. You are a species of toddlers brandishing scrap metal. Leland Shaw, the human diplomat, reddened. He was a creature of the boardroom, accustomed to hostile takeovers, not this kind of serene, galactic condescension. Flustered, he gestured toward Greg. Our chief of security has certain reservations about energy-based weapon platforms. Field reliability under adverse conditions is a primary concern for our frontier forces. Theon laughed. It was an unnatural sound, a cascade of tinkling, glassy notes that made the small hairs of Greg's arms prickle. Reliability. Our technology has functioned without a single systemic failure for 1,000 of your solar years. It is a reflection of our own perfection. So, demonstrate for us, barbarian. Show us the crude relic of yours. Let us witness the pinnacle of your functionality. Greg exhaled, a long, weary sound from a man who'd been shoved one time too many. He pushed himself from the wall, the heavy plates of his armor groaning softly. He holstered the reassembled magnum and ambled to the testing wall at the far end of the lounge, a thick slab of starship-grade plasteel. He offered no words, no preamble. He simply drew the magnum. It was a blocky, utilitarian piece of black metal and polymer, its grip worn smooth from a decade of use. He assumed a two-handed stance, sighted down the simple iron posts, and squeezed the trigger. The noise was an act of violence against the serene quiet. It wasn't a cultured hiss or a gentle hum. It was a deafening, concussive crack-boom that physically shook the air of the room. A gout of orange fire erupted from the muzzle, and the heavy slide slammed backwards, ejecting a gleaming brass casing that spun end over end before clattering onto the floor. The .45 caliber armor-piercing round struck the plasteel wall with the force of a wrecking ball. It didn't scorch or melt the surface. It punched a deep, ugly crater into the metal, sending a spiderweb of fractures radiating outward. The entire station seemed to vibrate from the sheer kinetic transfer. The room fell into a new kind of quiet, a ringing, bruised silence. The sharp, acrid smell of burnt propellant filled the air, a chemical declaration of war that smothered the faint, sterile scent of the Celestine tech. Theon's smirk was now a taut, brittle thing, but it remained. He inclined his head toward one of the guards. The guard stepped forward, raised the weapon of sculpted light, and fired. The weapon emitted only a soft, almost imperceptible "whee." A brilliant lance of turquoise energy, perfectly coherent and painfully bright, crossed the room and struck the wall. It didn't crater the plasteel. It created an intensely hot, molten pool that glowed white-hot for a heartbeat, before cooling into a glassy, smooth depression. The quiet that settled this time was heavier, denser. Every eye in the room darted between the two marks on the wall. One, a brutal, deep wound punched into the structure. The other, a searing, shallow burn on its surface. Greg holstered his magnum. He looked from the molten slag to Theon.
Yours makes a puddle, mine makes a hole,
he said, his voice flat and final.
When something big, mean, and ugly is running at you through a wall, you want a hole. Why would you ever want a downgrade?
For a fraction of a second, Emissary Theon's face, a carefully constructed mask of perfect diplomatic composure, simply shattered. It wasn't anger that broke through, or even shock. It was the naked, raw expression of a man watching his entire future, his legacy, and his meticulously planned career path sublimate into a cloud of cordite smoke. The public humiliation, the sheer, undeniable evidence of his culture's flawed foundational premise, delivered by a grunt in a scarred, functional set of armor. It was an intolerable, career-ending stain. His meticulously orchestrated ascension wasn't just over, it was annihilated. A sharp, cold desperation bloomed behind his eyes. His hand moved, a subtle twitch as his thumb depressed a communicator woven into the cuff of his robes. A voice, cold and synthesized, whispered directly into his auditory nerve, a ghost in his own head. The message came from an aide to Grand Arbiter Theremin, the iron-willed leader of the Ascendancy's militaristic faction, who had been monitoring the negotiation.
The Grand Arbiter finds their insolence aesthetically displeasing. You will not permit them to leave this station. Rectify this failure.
The order was Theon's death sentence as much as it was the humans'. He was no longer a diplomat. It was a disposable instrument for Theremin's ambition. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod, his features resembling a mask of cold, brittle fury.
Seize them,
Theon commanded, his melodic voice now thin as spun glass.
Their vulgarity requires correction.
The two Celestine guards raised their plasma rifles. They were beautiful, elegant, and had a charge cycle of approximately 1.2 seconds. Greg Stone had a charge cycle of 0. He was already in motion, his armored boot kicking the massive osmium table. The slab, weighing several hundred pounds, scraped, tilted, and then flipped, its polished surface slamming into the two guards just as their rifles began to whine. The human delegation shrieked and dove for the floor. In the same fluid motion, Greg's two teammates, Cassia Bellwether and Dr. Quentin Barlow, reached under the lip of their side of the table. With a sharp tug, they released the magnetic clamp securing their stowed gear. Cass came up with a compact, drum-fed automatic shotgun. Quinn, to everyone's surprise, held two bulky, over-engineered coil pistols. The lounge detonated into violence. A plasma bolt, fired from a guard stumbling back to his feet, struck one of Greg's mercs square in the chest. The man's composite armor glowed cherry red and smoked furiously, the sheer thermal energy staggering him. He grunted, planted his feet, and answered with a 3-round burst from his assault rifle. The 7.62mm tungsten core rounds had no interest in melting the Celestine Guard's ornate armor. They punched straight through it, shattering the delicate alloy like fine china and slamming him against the far wall. The second guard deployed a personal energy shield, a shimmering, iridescent extension of his armor. Cass fired the shotgun. The cloud of hypervelocity steel pellets hit the shield. An energy field designed to disperse a focused energy beam had no conceptual framework for dealing with 24 separate kinetic impacts arriving at the same instant. The shield flickered, overloaded with a cascade of error messages, and collapsed in a shower of blue sparks. The second shotgun blast tore the guard in half. The Celestine weapons, designed for honorable open-field combat at range, revealed their critical flaws in chaotic close-quarters brawls. The air, now a thick soup of cordite and the vanilla copper stench of discharged plasma, grew hot. One of the elegant rifles, jostled by the concussion of a nearby shotgun blast, suffered a microscopic fracture in its primary focusing array. When the guard tried to fire again, The unstable energy feedback loop caused the weapon to detonate in his hands, transforming his upper torso into an expanding cloud of superheated gas and vaporized crystal. They kicked, punched, and used overturned furniture as cover. Greg vaulted over the bar, snatched a bottle of expensive Aldebaran whiskey, and smashed it over the head of a Celestine Station security officer who had just entered the room. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't clean. It was solved. "Out, now!" Greg roared, laying down covering fire with his magnum. The heavy slugs punched through the lounge's decorative, paper-thin walls with contemptuous ease. His crew required no further prompting. Cass and Quinn were already moving. They burst from the lounge and into the main concourse of the gutter. Alarms blared, a discordant symphony of alien sirens and panicked chimes. Civilians of 24 species scattered, shrieking in 100 different languages. Celestine Station security, clad in the same elegant but fragile armor, began pouring in from connecting corridors, firing their powerful but slow-charging plasma bolts. Cass's voice, a beacon of cheerful pandemonium, cracked over their private comms. "The unkempt maiden is hot and ready, boys and girls. Try not to get any more holes in the hull. I just patched the last ones with industrial-grade asteroid insulation foam." They sprinted through the panicked crowds, a tide of bodies parting before their armored forms. A plasma bolt sizzled past Greg's head, melting a neon sign that fizzled and dripped molten plastic onto the deck. "Quinn, the lift!" Greg yelled, pointing to a massive cargo platform 50 meters ahead. Quinn, a man whose primary form of exercise was typically frantic gesturing, ran with a surprising, gangly speed. He skidded to a halt at the lift's control panel, pulling a multi-tool from his pocket. "Appalling! The power-to-mass ratio in this contraption is grotesquely inefficient. They're bleeding at least 12% of their potential energy to thermal radiation," he said, jamming a bypass key into the console. The cargo lift shuddered to life, its massive platform descending to their level. They scrambled behind it, its bulk a moving barricade. Celestine plasma fire splashed harmlessly against 3 meters of reinforced steel. "See? Inefficient, but robust," Quinn shouted gleefully over the whine of the lift's motors. "A classic engineering trade-off. Form follows function, you pompous gas bags." They reached the hangar bay just as the lift doors opened. The scene was pure, glorious chaos. The unkempt maiden hung in the air a dozen meters from the bay opening. A ship only its creator could love. It was an ugly, asymmetrical freighter. Its hull a patchwork quilt of different alloys, exposed conduits, and aftermarket additions bolted on with more faith than engineering rigor. Its primary throttle lever was a jury-rigged industrial wrench held in place with C-clamps. The side ramp was slammed down, revealing a dimly lit cargo bay that smelled of stale coffee and hydraulic fluid. Cass's face, grinning maniacally, appeared on a forward view screen. "Your chariot awaits! Hope you left a tip?" They made a desperate leap, one by one, landing hard on the ramp. As Greg scrambled aboard, he saw a squad of Celestine security setting up a heavy plasma repeater at the edge of the bay. "Cass, light 'em up!" "With gusto." Point defense turrets, crudely welded to the unkempt maiden's hull, swiveled and spat a torrent of tracer fire. The deafening chatter of the quad-barreled autocannons filled the hangar, chewing up the deck plating and forcing the Celestine soldiers to dive for cover. With a roar from its overstressed engines and the distinct hiss of a coolant pipe threatening to give way, the unkempt maiden blasted out of the station. They left behind a trail of destruction, a dozen dead Celestine, a shattered negotiation suite, and a diplomatic incident of truly galactic proportions. For Emissary Theon, it was the end of everything. For Grand Arbiter Theremin, it was the perfect beginning. Hephaestus Station wasn't a city so much as a perpetually expanding industrial malignancy carved into the heart of a massive asteroid. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and hot metal, and the constant low-frequency rumble of mining operations and ship repairs was the asteroid's very heartbeat. The debriefing was grim. The Terran Frontiers regional administrator, a woman with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite, listened to Greg's report without a single flicker of expression. When he finished, she just nodded slowly.
So, you punched a galactic empire in its perfectly sculpted mouth and then ran away?
He presented a weapon and called us toddlers.
Greg said flatly.
I presented a better one and called his bluff.
His people are calling it an unprovoked, barbaric assault on a diplomatic envoy,
the administrator said, swiping through reports on a datapad.
War is coming, Sergeant. You just fired the first shot.
Good,
Greg replied.
Maybe now they'll take us seriously.
There was nothing else to say. The crew headed for the hangar where the unkempt maiden was undergoing emergency repairs. The sounds were a comforting symphony to them. The hiss of welding torches, the percussive thud of rivet guns, the angry whine of grinders shaping metal. Greg spotted a familiar face leaning against the hull of a neighboring ship, the Mongrel. Captain Bomber Mako was a mountain of a man with a beard that looked like it contained its own unique ecosystem. He saw Greg and his face split open into a wide grin.
Stone!
Bomber's laugh boomed across the hangar, loud enough to be heard over the industrial din. He clapped Greg on the shoulder with a hand the size of a small ham.
I heard you started the war. I knew you had it in you. Always said you were too damn quiet.
Greg couldn't suppress a weary smile.
Someone had to. Their emissary was boring me to death.
They share a moment of dark gallows humor, the unspoken understanding between two veterans who knew exactly what was coming. Bomber's gaze drifted over to the unkempt maiden, where Cass was engaged in a heated, one-sided debate with a maintenance tech about the ship's coolant mixture.
Just try to keep that head of yours in one piece this time, Bellwether,
Bomber yelled.
Wouldn't want to scratch the paint.
Cass, without missing a beat, flipped him a cheerful, two-fingered salute. Don't you worry about me, Bomber. I'll be sure to grab you a shiny hood ornament from the flagship. Her smile was wide and full of bravado, but for a split second her eyes lingered on the scarred hull of the Mongrel. The bravado faltered. She'd seen too many good ships, too many good people not come back. Then the grin snapped back into place. A shield as real and functioning as any armor plating. The news of the gutter incident spread like a virus through the galactic comms network. On the Celestine capital world, a planet of pristine, architecturally perfect cities and manicured landscapes, Grand Arbiter Thurman addressed the High Council. The chamber was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all white stone and soft, indirect light, intended to promote clarity of thought. Thurman stood alone in the center, her uniform a severe, elegant black. She masterfully framed the incident not as a bungled negotiation, but a calculated, barbaric assault by an inferior species. Holographic replays, carefully edited to remove any Celestine aggression, flickered in the air around her.
For generations, the diplomatic houses have insisted on treating these humans as equals,
she declared, her voice cold and resonant.
They told us 3 primitives could not be reasoned with. This is the fruit of their naivete. But this is not the first time the Ascendancy has faced such a chaotic, functionalist plague.
Her eyes swept the chamber.
Some of you are old enough to remember the reports from the Viridian system. The Grev, a species that embraced ugly technology, that built machines of brutal function with no thought to consequence or elegance. Their uncontrolled, jerry-rigged experiments tore a hole in space-time that consumed their world and 2 of our patrol fleets. We learned then that such a philosophy cannot be contained. It must be excised.
She gestured to the hologram in the crater of the Plestial wall.
This is their philosophy. Brute force, unthinking violence. Their doctrine of function over form is not merely an engineering principle. It is a cultural contagion, a threat to our very way of life. It celebrates ugliness, chaos, and imperfection.
Her voice dropped, yet it seemed to gain weight, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber.
These humans are not a species to be negotiated with. They are a chaotic plague. And plagues must be pacified. They must be contained.
The council, swayed by her powerful rhetoric and the ghost of a past catastrophe, was hers. They granted her unanimous command of an expeditionary force to bring the upstart Sol system to heel. Her war, the war she'd been seeking for decades, had finally begun. The Grand Arbiter's message to the Terran frontier was broadcast on all channels. The chillingly calm ultimatum demanding unconditional surrender and the handover of Greg Stone and his crew for public correction. The response came not from politicians, but from the shipyards. A gruff, system-wide broadcast went out to the Hephaestus Station administrator.
We're not building a fleet. We're strapping guns to an entire civilization shipping and mining sector. Every hauler, every prosecutor, every rock hopper is now a warship. So if you have a working reactor and a hull that holds air, report to your nearest mobilization point. We are the Junker Fleet.
Dr. Quentin Barlow was in his element. He became a whirlwind of manic energy, a grease-stained phantom haunting the shipyards, his mind firing on all cylinders. This was not about inventing new, elegant technology to match the Celestine. It was about adapting, improvising, and weaponizing the one thing humanity had in abundance: heavy industry. The resulting montage was a symphony of glorious, defiant noise. The high-pitched screech of plasma cutters slicing through freighter hulls. The brilliant flash of welders stitching thick plates of raw steel and ceramic composites onto unarmored superstructures. The percussive thud, thud, thud of pneumatic rivet guns. Sounds like the drums of some forgotten, angry god. Massive kinetic asteroid crackers, magnetic accelerators designed to pulverize rock, were stripped from mining ships. Quinn, with a team of equally manic engineers, recalibrated them, turning them into terrifying spinal mount railguns, their exposed magnetic coils glowing with barely contained power. Cargo freighters, designed to haul grain and machine parts, had their hulls reinforced with meters of extra plating. The result was ships with exposed power conduits, glaring structural weaknesses, and the aerodynamic profile of a thrown brick, but it could absorb a phenomenal amount of punishment. Nuclear fission reactors from decommissioned colonial power plants, deemed too dirty and inefficient for decades, were dragged out of storage and jury-rigged into engine bays. Their radiation shielding a worrying last-minute addition that consisted mostly of lead plates and a handwritten sign that said, "Stay clear." Humanity was not building warships. It was building armored, spacefaring middle fingers with engines. In the midst of this controlled pandemonium, Quinn pulled Greg and Cass aside to a secluded fabrication bay. The air inside hummed with the power of a single, massive 3D printer laying down layers of sintered metal. In the center of the bay rested a familiar archaic shape, an M90 Grizzly main battle tank, its design almost 300 years old. But this one was different. Massive, glowing, magnetic plates had been crudely welded to its treads and underbelly.
"Behold!"
Quinn proclaimed, spreading his arms wide. He smelled faintly of ozone, burnt coffee, and unbridled enthusiasm.
"The hull-boarding assault vehicle, or the Havoc rig."
He tapped the datapad, and a simulation played on a nearby wall screen. It showed a heavy freighter flying low over an asteroid, its cargo bay doors opening. A Grizzly tank dropped out, its magnetic plates flaring to life. It hit the asteroid surface with a heavy clunk, its treads locking onto the rock. It then began to drive across the surface, its main cannon swiveling to blast a mining outpost to rubble. A nearby chief engineer, a man with a permanent skeptical frown etched onto his face, scoffed. "You're insane, Barlow. The combat G-forces on the crew, the targeting deviation from maneuvering in zero-G, the sheer energy required to power those clamps is a ridiculous fantasy." Quinn just grinned, a flash of white in a grime-streaked face. "Science, my dear boy, is merely fantasy constrained by budget, and my budget is currently the continued survival of the species." Greg just shook his head, a gesture of weary acceptance of Quinn's particular brand of genius. But Cass's eyes lit up with a dangerous, predatory gleam. She walked over to the tank, running a hand over its thick, welded armor. "Quinn," she said, her voice low and excited. "Can you make it drop from my ship?" Grand Arbiter Theremin was a creature of logic and order. Her strategies were flawless, her predictions based on millennia of established Celestine doctrine. The humans were primitives. Their ships were slow, their technology crude. Therefore, a demonstration of overwhelming force was the logical next step. Confident in her technological superiority, she dispatched a single Dauntless-class cruiser, the Luminous Blade, to intercept the source of the fugitive's transponder signal. Cass had to make sure to leave it active, a breadcrumb trail leading them right where she wanted them. The plan was simple: destroy the ship and its infamous crew, and broadcast the recording. It would break their morale. It was logical. The Luminous Blade was a work of art, a sleek, blade-like ship that moved with silent, ethereal grace through the deep black. Its captain, a Celestine noble from a proud lineage, stood on his sterile, silent bridge. There were no clanking metal plates or hissing steam pipes here. Alerts were soft chimes. The air was perfectly filtered. It was a temple dedicated to the perfection of war. From that temple, he watched the lone, battered human freighter appear on his primary screen, exactly where his superior long-range sensors predicted it would be. It was, just as intelligence suggested, a pathetic sight. Its transponder was broadcasting a fluctuating, unstable energy signature. His sensors confirmed it, picking up a massive, erratic radiation leak from its jury-rig reactor. It looked like a wounded animal, bleeding energy into space, barely holding itself together. The captain allowed himself a small, superior smile. This would be a swift, clean victory. The Luminous Blade closed the distance, its forward plasma cannons beginning to charge with a distinctive, otherworldly glow. The energy buildup was visible even across thousands of kilometers of space. On the cramped, vibrating bridge of a ship hiding in the shadow of the shattered moon, Cassia Bellwether grinned. "They're taking the bait. Hook, line, and sinker." She was watching the Celestine ship on her real target, a hollowed-out asteroid hauler packed with signal repeaters. It was broadcasting a perfect spoofed copy of the Unkempt Maiden's transponder, along with a massively amplified, fake radiation signature Quinn had designed to look like a critical reactor failure. It was the electronic equivalent of a bleeding goat tied to a stake. "Hey kid, you guys comfy back there?" she quipped into the comms. A muffled voice crackled back from the lead attack ship. "Just peachy, Cass. Try not to get us killed before we get to do the fun part, though." As the Celestine cruiser entered a dense debris field, the rest of the human squadron emerged from the darkness. They were hideous. The lead ship was a converted ore hauler, a colossal, blocky vessel named the Debt Collector. Its entire forward superstructure had been replaced by the massive exposed coils of a railgun Quinn had affectionately christened the Superintendent. On the bridge of the Debt Collector, Greg stood behind the weapons officer. "Quinn, you good?" Quinn's voice, giddy with excitement, crackled from the engineering station. "Oh, system's normal. I'm shunting every last jewel from the primary and secondary reactors into the main capacitors. We might not have power for life support for a few minutes after we fire, but it'll be worth it. Fire, Greg commanded. The superintendent unleashed a 10-kilogram tungsten spike at a significant fraction of the speed of light. It made no sound in the vacuum, but the ship itself groaned in protest, the massive recoil sending shudders through the entire frame. The Celestine shields, masterpieces of energy dissipation, flared brilliantly as the spike approached. They were designed to stop plasma bolts, laser beams, and particle waves. They were not designed to stop a freight train moving at relativistic speeds. The shields flared, held for a nanosecond, and then collapsed instantly under the raw, overwhelming kinetic force. The tungsten spike ripped through the luminous blade's beautiful blade-like hull from bow to stern. It didn't explode. It just tore a hole clean through the ship, venting atmosphere, equipment, and crew into the void. The elegant vessel, a symbol of Celestine perfection, split in two like a piece of firewood. The rest of the junker fleet, a motley collection of armed freighters and retrofitted miners, descended on the wreckage like vultures, cleaning up the escape pods and lifeboats with a merciless barrage of missiles and coil gun fire. The battle was brutal, messy, and over in 97 seconds. Cass, being Cass, had not just recorded the battle, she had edited it, adding a thumping, centuries-old rock anthem called Thunderstruck as a soundtrack. Complete with the gratuitous slow-motion replay of the tungsten spike's impact, leaked it through her extensive network of smugglers and information brokers. On a grimy, Celestine-controlled factory moon hundreds of light-years away, a group of four-armed Grev workers huddled around a hidden, flickering projector in a maintenance tunnel. The Grev were a subjugated species, forced to manufacture delicate components for the Celestine war machine. Their own simmering rebellion had been stymied for years. Their scavenged Celestine plasma rifles were elegant but unreliable, constantly failing in the dusty, high-gravity environment of their world. They watched the footage of the invincible, luminous blade being torn apart by a ship that looked like a flying brick with a gun attached. Their jaws dropped in disbelief and awe. A Grev engineer, a female named Niska, paused the footage on a close-up, a camera feed from one of the human ships showing a Marine returning fire. The Marine's rifle, a boxy, metallic contraption, spat fire, and a small metal cylinder ejected from its side.
Look,
Niska said, her voice a series of hushed clicks and whistles.
No external power pack, no focusing crystal. It's a machine. A simple, self-contained machine.
For days, they obsessively studied the fragmented footage, reverse engineering the concept not from schematics but from pure observation. They were master mechanics, their entire lives spent working with industrial presses, hydraulic pistons, and high-tensile alloys. They understood the principles: a contained chemical explosion, a piston, a projectile. The scene ended with Niska in a hidden workshop, holding a freshly assembled weapon. It was ugly as sin, a brutalist assembly of pipes, springs, and gears stripped from their own factory equipment. She held it up, worked a lever on either side, and a heavy, brutal shk echoed in the small room. It was a sound of a very old, very simple, very deadly idea spreading across the galaxy. It was the sound of a new war beginning. The junker fleet limped back to Hephaestus Station. The victory celebration was wild, fueled by cheap synthale and the sheer giddy relief of survival. But it was short-lived. On the bridge of the unkempt Maiden, the party atmosphere had long since evaporated. The mood was somber as the fleet-wide casualty report scrolled across a flickering monitor. Victory had come at a cost. Several ships had been lost to lucky shots or catastrophic engine failures. Dozens of crew were dead. Greg's eyes scanned the list of destroyed vessels. His gaze froze on one name: Mongrel, Captain Bomber Mako. Dead, along with his entire crew of 73 souls. Greg's face became a grim, unreadable mask. He said nothing. He stood, walked over to a section of the Maiden's hull where a jagged piece of shrapnel from the battle was still embedded. A deep, ugly scar in the metal. He rested his hand on the cold plate, his knuckles white. The loss was no longer an abstract number on a screen. It was personal. It was a booming laugh, silenced forever. Quinn watched him, then turned his own gaze back to the casualty list. He pushed his spectacles up to his nose.
Such a wasteful expenditure of, mass and energy,
he murmured, almost to himself.
All that potential, all those complex biological systems, converted to entropy.
It was an engineer's lament, cold and clinical, but it was his form of grief, a mourning for the elegant machinery of life now broken. This was not just a war for survival anymore. It was for Bomber. It was for all of the others who wouldn't be coming home. The adrenaline of the fight faded, replaced by the cold, heavy reality, war. Aboard her flagship, the Blade of Symmetry, Grand Arbiter Theremin observed her fleet arranging itself into a flawless geometric pattern in high orbit above a staging world. Thousands of ships, each one a testament to Celestine design philosophy, moved in perfect, silent synchronicity. The sight was one of breathtaking order and power. It reaffirmed her belief in her culture's inherent superiority. An aide approached, his footsteps silent on the polished deck.
Grand Arbiter, we have received reports from the Grev factory moon. A rebellion has broken out. They are using crude projectile weapons.
He brought up footage of Grev rebels firing their makeshift shotguns, the weapons kicking like mules and spitting fire. Theremin watched the grainy footage for a moment, her expression one of mild distaste. She dismissed it with an elegant wave of her hand.
Filth breeds filth. Their primitive tools are a reflection of their primitive minds. Once we excise the human infection from the galaxy, the body of the Ascendancy will heal itself. Ignore them.
The scene briefly cut to a sterile, minimalist Celestine home in the capital world. A family, their features serene and perfect, watched a sanitized news report about the pacification effort in the barbarian sectors. A grainy image of a human junker ship, likely the debt collector, filled the screen.
How can they even bear to look at such ugliness?
The mother asked her child, her voice laced not with hatred, but with genuine aesthetic disgust.
It's an offense to the senses.
Her child, a perfect miniature of his parents, nodded sagely.
It looks broken, Mother.
The cultural chasm, the deep-seated aesthetic dogma made them utterly incapable of seeing the threat for what it truly was. They saw a broken thing, not a weapon forged in desperation and purpose-built for one thing, to break them. In the Sol system, human command was deadlocked. The strategists, the admirals who had come up in a time of corporate skirmishes, wanted to dig in, fortify Earth, turn Mars into a bastion, fight a defensive war. Greg, his face still grim with the news of Bomber's death, stormed into the command center on Hephaestus Station.
That's a losing game,
he barked, slamming his palm on the central holographic display, causing the perfect grid of defensive positions to flicker.
We let them come here, and they'll pick us apart. Their ships are faster, their range is better. You fight a defensive war, or we lose. We die in a neat little row.
The presiding admiral frowned.
And your alternative, Sergeant?
We do what they'll never expect. We fight on our terms. Chaos. We need to be illogical.
Greg said, his voice raw.
We take the entire damn fleet, everything we've got, and we jump right into their staging ground. We hit them while they're still polishing their ships and admiring their perfect formations.
His argument, backed by the victory against the luminous blade, sowed a seed of doubt in the room. The plan was insane, and was suicidal, it was also the only plan that didn't end with a slow, methodical defeat. The Admiral looked at the casualty reports, and back at the fire in Greg's eyes. He made his decision. The entire human frontier fleet made a desperate, preemptive jump to the Celestine staging system. The visual of their arrival was stark and terrifying. A chaotic, mismatched swarm of ugly, powerful junkers. Their engines burning dirty fusion and splitting radiation, vomiting out of hyperspace directly on top of the perfect, gleaming, geometric formations of the Celestine Armada. It was a scrapyard thrown at a museum. The battle was pure, unadulterated chaos. The Celestine, expecting a cautious probe or a skirmish at the system's edge, were caught completely off guard. Their perfect formations broke as they scrambled to react. The human strategy was simple, brutal, and effective. Close the distance. They used their thick, overplated hulls as weapons, deliberately ramming smaller Celestine frigates and destroyers. The Celestine ships, designed with minimal internal bracing to save weight and enhance elegance, crumpled like aluminum cans. Greg led a boarding party, their transport a magnetic breach torpedo fired from a converted asteroid tug. It slammed into the side of a Celestine carrier, its explosive bolts blowing a hole in the hull. Greg and his Marines, clad in heavy, sealed armor, stormed through the breach. The sounds of the human assault were an obscenity in the pristine ship. The heavy, magnetic clang, clang, clang of their armored boots on decks designed for silent footsteps. The guttural, shouted commands of the Marines echoing in halls that had only ever known soft, melodic chimes and whispered orders. The fighting inside was a meat grinder. The corridors of the Celestine ship were wide and minimalist, becoming perfect kill boxes for human shotguns and fragmentation grenades. The air, once filled with the sterile scent of recycled air and vanilla, was now thick with the acrid smell of cordite, blood, and burnt electronics. Celestine soldiers, trained for long-range plasma combat, were psychologically and tactically unprepared for bloody violence in a close-quarters fight. Their plasma rifles took too long to recharge. Their elegant armor offered no protection against point-blank shotgun blasts. Greg and his Marines, veterans of claustrophobic corporate shipboardings, advanced with ruthless efficiency, a wave of brutal functionality washing through the ship's pristine form. As a shock and awe tactic designed to cripple the Celestine command structure, Cass, now piloting a heavy freighter with Quinn's Havoc rig secured in its bay, executed a daring, suicidal strafing run on the flagship, the Blade of Symmetry. Skimming over the dorsal hull, she weaved through the point defense fire that boiled away chunks of her ship's armor. "Delivering a package for the Grand Arbiter!" she yelled over the fleet-wide comm, her voice giddy with adrenaline. "Signature required!" She opened the cargo bay doors. The M90 Grizzly tank dropped. Its magnetic treads flared to life, locking onto the flagship's hull with a deafening clang that echoed through the superstructure of the massive vessel. The tank, a 300-year-old design, began its rampage across the elegant lines of the celestial flagship. Its main cannon, designed for planetary warfare, blasted apart plasma turrets and delicate sensor arrays with contemptuous ease. Its heavy machine guns chewed through exposed conduits and communication relays. On her immaculate bridge, Grand Arbiter Theremin watched in horrified disbelief as all of her perfect strategies, all of her illogical predictions collapsed into anarchy. One screen showed her beautiful ship being brutalized by a primitive tracked vehicle. Another showed her disciplined soldiers being cut down in corridors by weapons that fired metal shards. A bridge feed from another cruiser showed a human Marine, his armor pockmarked by plasma burns, calmly reloading his rifle while his companion used a roll of metallic sealant tape to apply a patch to a breach in the hull. Her tactical AI, the pinnacle of Celestine processing power, kept flashing the same alert on her command throne's display. "Enemy tactics defy logical prediction. Recommend reassessment." The frustration, the confusion, the sheer cognitive dissonance that had been building since she first saw the report from the gutter, finally crystallized into a terrible, shattering clarity. She looked at the image of the tank grinding across her hull, an ugly, functional scar on her ship's perfection. She finally understood.
They were never primitive,
She whispered, her voice barely audible to her stunned bridge crew.
They were optimized.
She stared at the chaos unfolding on her screens. The scrappy, ugly human ships overwhelming her perfect fleet through sheer, illogical aggression.
Optimized for this, for survival, for chaos.
The human flagship, a monstrous, asymmetrical beast, from 3 decommissioned carriers and a mining platform welded together, which Quinn had christened the Amalgam, was dying. It served as the anvil for the human fleet's hammer, absorbing the brunt of the Celestine counterattack. Its shields were long gone, its hull a ruin of breaches and fires, but its over-engineered, radiation-leaking reactors were still burning hot. On its jury-rigged bridge, the human admiral, his face covered in soot, made the final call.
All hands, brace for impact. Cass, she's all yours.
Cass, having docked her battered freighter inside the Amalgam's cavernous main hangar, sprinted to the command chair. The controls were a chaotic mess of old and new tech, but the ship responded to her touch.
Let's get messy,
she grinned, pushing the main throttle levers past the red safety lines. The massive ship groaned, protesting the strain. The Amalgam, a monument to humanity's stubborn refusal to die, accelerated. It shrugged off plasma fire that boiled away entire sections of its outer armor, its forward section glowing like a meteor on re-entry. It was on a direct collision course with the Celestine Central Command Station, a delicate ring structure of gossamer towers and beautiful arrays that served as the Armada's nerve center. The Amalgam smashed into the station. The impact was a cataclysm of screeching, tearing metal and catastrophic, explosive decompression. The elegant Celestine structure shattered, the human ship plowing deep into its core before its reactors finally went critical. The resulting explosion was silent, but blindingly bright, wiping out 1/3 of the Celestine command structure instantly. Before the survivors of the crippled station could react, assault ramps dropped from the wreckage of the human flagship, which was now embedded in the station like a colossal metal spear. Hundreds of human marines in bulky, powerful exosuits, their armor scarred and scorched, stormed through the breach. Greg, his rifle hot in his hands, led the charge. They fought their way through the ruined corridors to the auxiliary command bridge. There, among the sparking consoles and the bodies of her command staff, sat the cornered Grand Arbiter Theremin. She remained poised, her uniform immaculate even amidst the destruction. Her expression was one of chilling calm. As Greg advanced, she raised a hand. A sophisticated personal energy shield, the pinnacle of Celestine defensive technology, shimmered to life around her. Simultaneously, a hidden plasma turret deployed from the ceiling, its focusing array glowing as it acquired a target lock on Greg. It was a perfect, unbeatable defense. Greg did not hesitate. He didn't fire at her shield. He didn't try to dodge the turret. He raised his rifle and fired a single, well-aimed shot, not at her, but at the thick, exposed power conduit on the wall just behind her. The tungsten core round tore through the conduit. It exploded in a shower of brilliant blue sparks. The lights on the auxiliary bridge flickered red and died, and with them, Theremin's personal shield and the plasma turret. They went dark with a pathetic fizzle. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, the barrel of his rifle inches from her face. That final, personal, visceral failure. Her perfect technology defeated not by a superior weapon, but by a single bullet hitting an obvious, functional weak point. That was what finally completely broke her. Grand Arbiter Theremin looked at the dead, smoking shield emitter on her wrist, then at the ugly, reliable rifle in Greg's hands. In that moment, she understood.
She had not just lost a battle. Her entire civilization's philosophy of war had been rendered obsolete by a species that did not care what the tools looked like, long as they worked. With a chillingly calm expression, she reached up and deactivated the command insignia on her collar.
To continue this conflict would be an illogical waste of resources,
She stated, her voice devoid of all emotion.
You have changed the equation. The Ascendancy must adapt, or it will perish. I surrender.
Days later, the bridge of the Uncapped Maiden was quiet. It was docked inside the captured but heavily damaged Celestine command station. The chaotic human outpost in the heart of what was once a symbol of perfect order. Through the main viewport, the crew watched as the last ships of the Celestine Armada, their formations broken and scattered, transmitted their final surrender codes and jumped away into the black. The war was over. They had won. The bridge was a disaster zone of exposed wiring, cracked screens, and a prominent coffee stain on a console that looked vaguely like a nebula. Greg popped open a warm synth beer, handing one to Quinn and another to Cass. They were exhausted, bruised, covered in grime, but they were alive, and they were triumphant. Cass slumped into her worn-out pilot's chair and prodded a sparking console with the toe of her boot. It fizzled and went dark.
Well,
She said with a weary, triumphant grin, her eyes landing on the familiar high-temperature plasma welder sitting on the dashboard next to a sheet of scrap metal.
looks like the old girl needs some more custom bodywork.
Greg let out a short, sharp laugh. The first genuine laugh he'd had in weeks. It was the sound of victory. They had faced the galaxy's most advanced, most elegant empire, and had beaten them senseless. Not with superior technology, but with grit, ingenuity, and the unshakable, ugly, beautiful human belief in things that work.